Welcome to LFPL's At the Library series, an ongoing podcast featuring author talks, programs, and events at the Louisville Free Public Library. For more information about upcoming events, visit us online at www.lfpl.org/upcoming-events.htm.
Introduce Brooke Lauren Davis. She grew up in Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, and now lives in Louisville, Kentucky. She can be found frequently at Carmichael's Bookstore, either buying or, on occasion, selling books, and we love her dearly. She wrote her debut novel last year, or published her debut novel last year, The Hollow Inside. It is a thrilling revenge story full of secrets and lies, perfect for anyone who is a fan of E. Lockhart. Without further ado, please welcome Brooke Lauren Davis. Should I take a mic? Or?
No, you're mic'd.
Oh, I am mic'd. That's right. Okay. Hi, I'm Brooke Lauren Davis. Thank you so much for the introduction page, and I'm going to introduce E. Lockhart. E. Lockhart is the author of many beloved young adult novels, including Whistle, A New Gotham City Hero, Again, Genuine Fraud, Fly on the Wall, Dramarama, The Ruby Oliver Quartet, The Disreputable History of Frankie Landau Banks, which was a Prince Honor Award book and a finalist for the National Book Award. In 2014, she published We Were Liars, as I'm sure you all know, which introduced us to the privileged Sinclair family and Beechwood Island, where one tragic night changes everything. We Were Liars was named a Best Book of the Year by NPR, Time, The Wall Street Journal, and the Boston Globe. Now, 8 years later, it is number 2 on the New York Times YA paperback bestseller list. In her most recent book, Family of Liars, Lockhart takes us back to Beechwood Island 27 years earlier, exploring even more explosive secrets and lies behind the perfect Sinclair family facade. Family of Liars is currently a number 1 New York Times bestseller, and it's a thrilling ride you won't want to miss. Please join me in welcoming E. Lockhart to Louisville.
Thank you. You made me sound fancy.
It's easy to do.
Hi, thank you guys for coming out. It's nice to see your faces.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. We're gonna chat for a bit, and then there's gonna be a Q&A. And then we're gonna sign books.
Right.
So that's the plan.
Yeah. So I wanted to mention you were interviewed for Leo Weekly before you came, and you mentioned that you were excited about mint juleps, hot browns, and talking to me. And I was so flattered that you put me and hot browns like at the same level. Have you tried a hot brown yet?
No, I literally got here, and I had to wake up at 5:30, and I had a lot of my dad was super sick yesterday and the day before, and now is like awake in the hospital, and he's okay.
Oh,
but it was so hard to get be like, yes, I'm coming to Louisville and I'm gonna come, because it was like just last night that they were like, okay, he's okay.
Right.
So I was a basket case. So I woke up after like several days of being a basket case, and I feel like I just wanted to say that because, you dress up and you put on your makeup and you come and everyone thinks your life is great, and it is great, but it can also be a hot mess at the same time. And it's just like we all have our stuff, right? Anyway, so I had a lot of my stuff going on, and I got on I got up super early, and so I got to my hotel, and I had aspirations of hot brown and juleps for later, and all of this. And anyway, I was going to walk around in the down. I wanted to see Louisville, and I just passed out. I just went to bed for 3 hours,
right?
And that's what I did.
That's
so
totally
I've been a failure as a tourist completely.
That is okay. I'm sure many people here will have suggestions for where you can go. There are so many places. There's also a hot brown pizza at Danny Mac's that I highly recommend.
What is a hot brown pizza?
It's just everything that a hot brown is except on a pizza. So
with tomato sauce, or just on a pizza crust?
It's like just on a pizza crust. I highly recommend. It takes me like 40 minutes to get one, and I like went and got one once and got back and went back to my car to get something, and my dog had eaten half of it. And it was the most devastating thing that's ever happened. So.
Is that, okay, we're going to talk more about that later. I'm going to find out more details.
Yeah. Is your dad feeling better? I'm so sorry.
He is better.
Okay. Well,
yes.
It is so meaningful that you came out here to talk to all of us.
No,
we really appreciate that.
No, I was glad he was well, and now I was ready to be distracted.
Right. Right. With the super uplifting book. This book came out 8 years after We Were Liars.
Yeah.
And We Were Liars has had a really just unusual life cycle as a book. I mean, most of the time a book will, you work on a book for years, it comes out, people are excited for like 6 months, and then they're like, okay, what's next? Like, what have you written lately? But We Were Liars has just gotten more and more attention. It's been exciting, I'm sure. I was just curious what the process of writing Family of Liars was like with that kind of, I don't know, like attention, I guess. Just, was it a lot of pressure, or was it good for you having like a sort of a built-in audience already for this next book?
I mean, mostly it just felt so nice to have readers. Some books you end up with a lot of readers. Some books come out quietly and you feel like, you're not sure anybody read them. And that had happened to a couple books that I had done during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And, that's par for the course. It's part of the job. You have to just roll with it. And then, how many people here have seen TikTok videos about We Were Liars? Okay, a bunch of you, but not everybody. So I'm just going to explain what happened, which was a really unusual and kind of exciting new kind of book conversation that emerged, at least reached a height during the pandemic, of people on this social media app creating book-related content in a way that was different from other social media book content. So, like on Twitter, people are just chatting about books using words, right? They might recommend a book, they might criticize a book, they might ask a question, what people thought, and there can be a dialogue between people. On Instagram, people are taking beautiful photographs of their shelves and of their to-be-read lists and making stacks of books in different colors, but a lot of it is about the pleasure and the aesthetic of the physical book, right? And kind of using book photography to get people excited about book conversations. And TikTok I feel like it's really different than either of those two things, because what people are doing, sometimes people are making short films that are essentially aesthetics of like, what is the world inside the book? And there were some really gorgeous ones made for We Were Liars, like a composite of a whole lot of photographs of images that connect to the book in one way or another that create kind of the book world. And the other kind of videos that people made were response videos of them crying. So they would just be like snot and mascara and like, just like an ugly cry, right? Like holding the book and being like, WTF. And that would be the whole content of the film made by this person. Right. And those were so, nobody was being this raw or emotional or kind of real time about books on these other social medias. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it wasn't just my book, it was other books too that people were doing these kinds of responses to. But the books that became big hits, maybe 20 months ago when We Were Liars emerged, were all books that made people cry. Adam Silvera's beautiful sci-fi novel, They Both Die at the End. So a couple different books by Colleen Hoover, Song of Achilles, right, which is historical fiction. So really different genres, but all with that big emotional response that was being documented on TikTok. So anyway, it was a really cool, like people are like, oh, the youth, what are they doing? Nothing with the social media. It's all terrible, right? But I don't think that's true at all. I think people started this new kind of book conversation, which really made a difference in the marketplace. It made a huge difference for me. I had all these readers, so that was super nice. And now I have to tell another story.
Go on.
So I had all these readers for We Were Liars, which was just really like a blessing. It was just a wonderful thing that happened to me. Really, a lot of luck involved. And so my publisher had been asking, did I maybe want to write a sequel or a follow-up novel? And I really could not think of any kind of idea for a second novel with Cadence Sinclair at the center of it that would be satisfying to anyone. If you haven't read We Were Liars, I do not want to spoil it for you today, but there are a bunch of reasons why it would be unsatisfying. And so I just was like, no, I cannot do this. I cannot do a good job, right? I'm not going to do a bad job and just take money. And I have a friend who is a novelist named Gail Foreman. She wrote If I Stay and We Are Inevitable and I Have Lost My Way and a lot of wonderful YA novels and some adult novels too. And Gail lives in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, and we live near a pretty big park. It takes about an hour for us to lady walk around the park. So we put on our sneakers. Gail has a dog. We, kind of cardio our way around the park without ever running. And it's relevant that it takes an hour because on this one day, Gail was like, I think you should write another book set in this universe. And I was like, no. And I explained why. And she was like, that's not a good enough reason. You have readers. You are lucky to have readers. It doesn't always happen that you have readers 8 years after a book comes out. It's so rare. You really should think about this seriously. And I was like, please leave me alone. And she did not leave me alone. She was like, let's brainstorm. What are your bad ideas? And I was like, well, here's my bad idea. And here's my other bad idea, but those are terrible. And she was like, well, what if you did this? And I was like, well, that's not what happens. And she's like, well, what if you did this other thing? And I was like, oh, no, not that. And as she kept on, asking me questions, and I realized that whenever I was rejecting things that she would say, it was because some part of me knew what it should be, right? Her ideas weren't bad ideas, but they weren't the idea that was somewhere way, way in the back of my head. And kind of by the time we had finished this hour-long walk, and Gail is a very persistent lady, I had the start of an idea that I thought would actually potentially be good. And that was Family of Liars.
Right. I'm so glad that happened. Thank you, Gail Foreman. And I meant to ask how much of the Ant story you knew while you were writing We Were Liars, but it sounds like on the surface you didn't really know anything about it. Interesting.
No,
so that all just came about sort of through this questioning process, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And Family of Liars is set on the same island, right? So there's a family called the Sinclair family who are old money Democrats, and there's a patriarch of the family named Harris Sinclair. He owns this island, and there are a number of houses on the island, and the family spends every summer there. So each summer, they all come together and have this kind of very intense, bonding summer on this windswept island. It has 2 little beaches, and it has these different houses. And so We Were Liars takes place in that setting, and Family of Liars is on that same island, but 27 years earlier. So it's the story of people who are adults in the first book, now back when they are teenagers.
I was curious about why you chose the point of view that you did, because when I first heard about the book, I assumed it was going to be Cadence's mother that you were speaking through. And Carrie, I think, was a really interesting choice, and I was really intrigued by that. And a big theme in the story is kind of point of view. She intersperses these fairy tales throughout, one of them being like Cinderella and this murderous fox prince sort
Mr.
of
Fox,
thing,
yeah.
Mr. Fox. And she's sort of questioning throughout, am I Mr. Fox or the maiden? Am I Cinderella or the stepsister? So clearly, point of view holds a lot of weight in this story and changes the story depending on what point of view you're speaking from. So why did you settle on that point of view?
Well, there's 2 reasons. One is Carrie is really a much more sympathetic character than Penny. Penny is a really difficult person who has been put into a very small box and has mostly stayed there. And by that, I mean a box, the way that familial expectations and societal rules can limit a person and limit their sense of themselves and their self-expression and their understanding of what they're capable of. And so Penny is is limited by that and is a prickly person as well. And Carrie is a more open-hearted person in We Were Liars. She's the person who brings Ed and Gat to the island. She's, left New England and gone to live in New York City. And she has a broader view of the world. And she's still limited in many ways and makes some terrible mistakes in We Were Liars. But I thought she was more sympathetic and would be a better, more self-aware narrator. Also, if you have read We Were Liars recently, you may remember a scene in which Carrie is wandering the island at night, and Cadence comes out on the porch, I think it's the porch, and talks to her. And Carrie says, I have a lot of trouble sleeping, and some nights, I talk to Johnny. And so that is why Carrie is the narrator of Family.
I think it was a really excellent choice. I particularly liked how self-aware she was, just because she is making a lot of really horrible decisions sometimes, as we all do. But she seemed to realize, she seemed to know kind of what she was doing, I guess. And Penny, seems to sort of justify what she does in her own mind a lot of the time. So I really liked
Penny
reading.
just decides that she's right.
Right.
And then there's no, there's kind of no, she's justified in doing whatever she's going to do. Right. And I know a lot of people like
that. She felt very real, for sure.
Right. Well, this is, if you haven't picked up The Hollow Inside yet, it is over there from Carmichael's. It's Brooke's book. And there's a lot of thematic overlap, I think, specifically around this thing that we're talking about, which is that in The Hollow Inside, it's a con artist story, and a revenge tragedy. And it's like We Were Liars and Family of Liars. It centers on a teenage girl who is capable of and has done some terrible things. And like it's an exploration of, why we have that inside of us. And if in fiction you can really explore, like what if the worst things I'm capable of I actually did? And how would I reconcile my own self to myself? And who am I if I have done these terrible things? And can I still love myself? And can I go forward? And can I recover from my worst crimes? So I feel like our books are really about that. But does that ring true for you? Like that of course, that's what I got out of it because I'm obsessed with that. Right. But
yeah, no, for sure. Especially, in your books, there's a lot of stuff that comes up that it's like, how would you ever forgive yourself? It's like, in We Were Liars in particular, it's just, well, in both of them, really, it's right. Like, how do you move on from that? And is there forgiveness for that? And if not, like, you're a teenager and you have the rest of your life still to live. How do you keep going? So I found that to be really interesting, definitely bold for sure, because I think a lot of writers shy away from that, because you had actually mentioned in the paperback edition, there's an essay in the back where you talk about how you were worried about how readers would receive your opiate-addicted heiress in the first book. And they seem to really respond. Obviously, they responded well to it. So one of my questions was, how do you think about writing unlikable characters? Why do you think we still root for them? Why are we still sympathetic to them, even though they're doing a lot of these questionable things?
Well, I think it's really interesting to see people who are in really intense predicaments. And sometimes the people who are put in really intense predicaments in fiction are heroes, but sometimes they are in really intense predicaments because they are up to no good and got themselves in there. And I think that like watching someone make bad choices is that's like what people are about, right? That's like, we all do it. And I think but it allows like you to sort of navigate your humanity in a fun and safe way, right? And I also think, I have this book called Genuine Fraud, which isn't here today, that actually is closer to The Hollow Inside. It's like a full-on con artist story. Actually, the protagonist of The Hollow Inside is much more sympathetic than the protagonist of Genuine Fraud, who really is up to no good in a premeditated and terrible way. But it's a con artist story, and so is The Hollow Inside. And I think that we have so many really rich narratives about people who pretend to be other than they are, or people who are criminals who are nonetheless sympathetic about men, right? We have a million movies from, Catch Me If You Can to Scarface, right? And we don't, and we have so many like ongoing heroes of mystery series and people like Jack Reacher who are like, really in a morally gray zone or kind of lawless. And we don't have, Batman. I love Batman. But what is he up to? Terrible things, right? He's a vigilante. Anyway. So we do have female characters like this, but not so many and not such dominant narratives. And I think that it's in some ways, a feminist project to explore that side of women, because we're people too, and we can be up to terrible things. And to me, that unlikable character, or that character who's made morally gray or even terrible choices and is dealing with the consequences, like that's a rich, complicated person. And I think that young people and older people like deserve to see that explored, with characters of all different gender identities.
Yeah, I love that you're doing it for teens in particular, just because, teenagers are real human beings. They're flawed human beings. So I think seeing that on the page is really important, and not just, this perfect person who always makes the right choice.
Right. I mean, I grew up, with, Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm and Pollyanna and Heidi, and even like Anne of Green Gables and Little Women, right, where the heroines are like, oh, I rail against the box that I'm being put into. They're nonetheless, trying to be good people, fundamentally trying to be good. That is the project. And in some cases, they are a ray of sunshine that brightens everybody's lives. And even Jo March is a ray of sunshine who brightens everybody's lives. And I'm not complaining about those books. I loved them, but I am looking to make something else.
Right. I love that. And then moving on from characters, I was really intrigued by the setting in particular, Beechwood Island. I love anything that has a really strong sense of place, where it feels like its own character, where the story just feels like it couldn't have been set anywhere else. So what was the inspiration behind Beechwood Island?
Oh, well, Beechwood Island is off the coast of Massachusetts, and it's a privately owned island, like I said, sort of a boat ride from Martha's Vineyard. And I didn't grow up like that. This is not my family, and it's not my social class either, really. But my parents were what, in 1965 was considered a mixed marriage, which is Jewish and Christian. And it was a big deal that my mom married a Jewish guy. And my mom's side of the family are East Coast WASPs, to give an unnuanced picture. And my dad was New York and Jewish, and his parents owned a grocery store. And so they got divorced. And I grew up mostly with my mom, who then rebelled against her WASPy upbringing by living in a commune dedicated to a New Age religion. It was called Eureka, and it was run by this guy who I later looked up, who was a Chilean mystic who was mostly famous, I'm not joking, for taking acid and swimming with dolphins.
Ooh.
So he had like a following of people who were like meditating. I mean, it was very harmless. Meditating, a little pot smoking, a bunch of yoga, right? Togetherness. So we lived in like a series of houses that were populated by people who were in Eureka. And so this was a very, sort of 70s hippie life. And then my mom was a preschool teacher. So in the summers, she had off. And so we would go to Martha's Vineyard, where my WASPy grandparents had built a home. And it's a modest home. It's on 2 acres, 3-bedroom house. But it was like a summer idol to me. And it was such a different world than the world of my dad, on the Lower East Side in New York City, or the world of my mom in this communal living situation. And so for many years, it seemed very idyllic to me, this world of my grandparents, which was, cocktail parties and garden clubs and walks on the beach. And, it was a pretty elite atmosphere. And as I grew up and became maybe more critically minded, further educated, more complicated as a thinker, I still loved it there, and I do still love it there, and I'm totally going there on July 1st. But I began to also see who was not there as well as who was there, and I became aware of the history of the land, which is Wampanoag land, and I became aware of the African American community in one part of Martha's Vineyard that was never in our part of Martha's Vineyard. And I became aware of my grandparents' attitudes, which were maybe needing some updating. And I became aware of like classism and racism and some stuff that was going on and some attitudes. And so there was a push-pull and a love-hate. And I think I gave most of that to Gat, right? As a New Yorker, a middle-class New Yorker who always has his hand in the air in the classroom, right? That's me. So even though Gat is so different from me in lots of parts of his lived experience, right? He has Indian heritage. But I also grew up with a single mom like him. So I was looking in writing him, even though he is different from me, for as many points of connection as I could make to create a rounded character. And in lots of ways, he's much more like me than any of the Sinclairs are in terms of coming to that island idol with some emerging critical faculties and with the love and repulsion happening.
Right. I mean, just hearing you talk about sort of this emerging self-awareness and awareness of the world around you, I'm just curious about, like, obviously the last couple of years, a lot of things have been going on just in the world. And people, when they turn to books, sometimes are looking for escape. But it seems like you sort of, instead of shutting out the world, you like to pull in all the complicated things that are going on to your work. So particularly just during the pandemic, I think a lot of people had trouble creating, trouble writing. Were you more focused on just bringing things in from the outside rather than pushing them out with your work?
I don't know if I know the answer to that. I wrote a lot. I wrote some stuff on spec. I wrote a comic for DC Comics. I invented a superhero. So I think that was definitely a response to like feeling powerless. It was an empowerment fantasy, as most superhero comics are, called Whistle. But I also like Family of Liars is it's it's a thriller and it's a summer love story also. And I didn't like decide, this will be one thing or another. I just like made it. You know what I mean? I just went into the fictional world and made it. A lot of it comes kind of unconsciously. I mean, I think a lot about structure, and I think a lot about giving pleasure to the reader and stuff like that. But a lot of times you're just kind of writing from, you don't necessarily know what you're going to write that day. You sit down and you know you're going to write a scene where they, go into Martha's Vineyard to the little town, and that by the end of that, they'll be in an argument with each other, right? So there's a scene where the love interest, Pfaff, basically these three young women are on an island, right, for the summer, every summer. And here they come back to the island for yet another summer. And Carrie, the heroine, is going through a lot for various reasons. But one big thing that happens is that a literal boatload of cute boys shows up on the island and moves into the guest house. And so these boys are very exciting to everybody. And there's one girl as well who's also exciting. And so these four new people, 3 boys and 1 girl, create upheaval for the sisters. And Pfaff is the love interest for Carrie. And so one day they go into town, they go shopping, and by the end of it, I wanted them to be angry at each other. But I didn't know what would happen what would they do? You know what I mean? I just knew that I had to get my characters into town and then something would happen. So then I'm just writing, and kind of, it's a discovery process. And, I can remember writing like the scene where Pfaff goes shopping, and I was just like, That he says this, then he says, I mean, it's just a long scene of him being funny in the store, but it just like, that was like a discovery process of like learning more about his personality that I hadn't necessarily like thought through before I got him in the store. Once he was in the store, he showed this side of his personality, and I sort of just was along for the ride.
Right. So it sounds like you do some planning, but kind of allow discovery to take over.
Yeah. I plan structurally.
Right. I would think being like the queen of plot twist, you'd kind of have to know what direction you're going a little bit.
Yeah, I do. Do you plan did you plan out Hollow Inside?
Parts of it. I mean, there was one plot twist that I had in mind, but then there ended up being, multiple things. My editor, I turned it in with just the one plot twist, and she's like, I feel like there are more skeletons in this closet. And I'm like, interesting. And I go back and just other things emerged.
That baby showed up.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, stuff happened with this baby.
Mm-hmm. Lots of stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
It is about time to switch to audience questions. I did just want to mention one other thing. So you mentioned in the essay for the paperback of We Were Liars that, you had all these doubts about publishing the book before it came out. And one of your friends gave you this advice where she said, if everyone likes you, you're probably a liar. And I just that resonated with me so much. And I was wondering if you would just tell me what that meant to you and how that affected your process going forward.
Yeah, that was actually Matt de la Peña who told me that. If you haven't read Matt de la Peña and you like young adult literature, I highly recommend. He won the Newbery, but that was for a picture book, and he writes some really great young adult novels. If you like my stuff, you would probably like Wish You Were Here. I think it's called Wish You Were Here. I think it's called We Were Here. We Were Here. But he also wrote a great thriller set on a cruise ship called The Living. Anyway, Matt said that in a lecture that I saw him give at Hamline University. And apparently it's a Charles Barkley quote. He's a basketball player. I mean, I know you know Charles Barkley. Matt is a basketball player. But it rang so true to me, right? And I think that as a person, right, I was taught to be pleasing, right, to adults and nice to your friends. And you're basically, as you're being socialized, you are taught to try to get people to like you, right? And this is part of inevitable socialization, right? Toddlers misbehave and are gently corrected or hopefully gently corrected into behaviors that allow them as children to be members of community, right? You share and you're repressing certain impulses in order to be a member of the community. So that repression is not necessarily bad. It allows us to be human together, right? And not be terrible. But at the same time, right, we can get that message so much that we become obsessed with pleasing other people and with being liked at the expense of our own sense of ourselves and our needs. And I think perhaps for women more than for men, this can be a thing that you wrestle with as an adult person, right? Now I have been a good girl. What's next, right? Because staying in that box is not fun, and nor is it fulfilling artistically or emotionally or even socially. So that is what I have been unlearning, right? To be a good girl. And it's been a long, interesting journey. And I probably will be on it my whole life because that's how these things work. But becoming unafraid of being disliked is really empowering, right? To be like, you don't need to like me if I am centered and know that I feel all right about the way I am behaving or the work that I'm creating. If I believe in the work that I'm creating, I do not need everyone to like it. And so publishing We Were Liars, I think, was a real step in that journey because it's really stylized. It's weird. It's confusing at the beginning. And it's about these rich people. And some people just hate them because you would hate them maybe if you actually met them. But I was trying to make them human. And I was writing this like hyperbolic style. And I just felt like I was going really out on a limb. And when Matt said that, I just thought, well, that's fine. It's fine. Not everyone will like it. That is scary. But what am I doing if I'm trying to make art and I'm never scared? That seems dumb.
Exactly.
Right?
That is such great advice. I love that. Okay, so it's time for audience questions. If anyone has anything that they would like to ask, we have a microphone at the center if anyone would like to venture out.
Oh yeah, the library asked that you brave the microphone because if people have assisted hearing devices, it will enable them to hear the question because it's all looped through their miracles. I just wanted to say, first of all, you could ask Brooke questions. Second of all, I don't want there to be any spoilers. So I'm pretty good at answering questions without spoilers, but you should couch your questions without them. But also, I'm happy to answer questions about whatever else you want to ask about. If you want to ask about my personal life, that's fine. If you want to ask, how much money I make, that's fine. If you want to, it's not that much. If you want to ask, like things about publishing, or you want to ask, book recs, or you want whatever other books that we're not talking about today, like it's really all fine. You should feel comfortable asking anything. You should. When authors are up here, we're really just secretly scared that no one will ask anything. So we will love you if you ask anything. Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to start off with two questions back to back, but one is, I'd be curious to know about your writing craft. And so you talk about, I think about structure first.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like for either of you when you think about structure for a person who might want to sit down and write a novel? What's your process there? The second one would be about, have you ever attended the Chillmark Writing Project? Or do you know anybody associated with that?
I'm going to answer that first one quickly. I'm going to Islanders Write this year, which is a Martha's Vineyard-based writing community situation. Chillmark is the town in Martha's Vineyard where my family's from. But no, I have never. This is going to be like my first foray into Martha's Vineyard writing community this summer. There is a big community of writers on the island, and I've always just kind of looked at them over there and been shy and not engaged. So yeah, I'll have a better answer at the end of the summer. Islanders write process. What do you do?
It sounds kind of similar to what you were describing earlier. I do have to have some sort of outline personally, but more like bullet points, and then I sort of let the characters sort of stretch out within that. I know some people who just like sit down with a blank page and just go, and I cannot do that. I have tried to do that, and it feels like just like getting halfway out into the ocean, and then you're like, where was I even? What island am I even looking for? So I can't do it. I always write myself into a corner, but I found an outline really helpful, even if I deviate a lot.
Yeah, I think you have to know that you will deviate from your outline. I work in a word processing program called Scrivener, and which is one really nice thing about it is it costs a medium amount of money, but you can download a 30-day free trial, and that's 30 days of actual use. So you could stretch that out over quite a long time, that 30 days where you're figuring out if this program is good for you. And it has a lot of bells and whistles and a lot of power, but the main thing I use is for structure. And what it allows you to do is to basically, if you imagine your novel on a bunch of index cards, and imagine that you had a table and you could spread them out and put the different scenes in order, and then you could move them around. But when you're moving them around, you're actually moving the whole chunks of your novel if you have written them around. So your novel is it's not just your outline in a new shape, it's your actual novel. And so I very often am brainstorming onto these imaginary I actually like to see them in a list view. But I'm putting like, this happens, then this happens, and each of those is a different index card, right? Basic stuff that happens. So sometimes it just says like, boatload of cute boys arrives on island, right? I don't even know who those boys are yet, right? And later I will have to figure that out. But I'm like, okay, that's a thing. That's going to have a cause and effect, right? So then I think, what could that effect be? And I'm making the notes, and maybe I have 3 different possible effects, and each of those is a different index card. But I would kind of chunk those together and know that, okay, what's the immediate effect? The immediate effect is X or Y or Z, and then I'm going to, all right, later on, then I keep brainstorming. But I'm brainstorming into this sort of word processing program that helps me use those brainstorms as structure, if that makes sense. And then I do a lot of moving. But I can see it from that like nice bird's eye view and a color code. What's your question?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Did you always want to be a writer, and did you study some kind of writing in school, or did you study a different field? Do you currently work in a different field outside of writing?
Thank you for that. Are you a writer?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
I'm going to Spalding this summer.
Oh, lovely. I wanted to be a writer when I was small. My father is a playwright, and that is a real, I think, gift to an aspiring creative person, to have a creative person in your family who just shows that this can be your job, right? He was a professor at NYU and taught playwriting and had plays produced. So I always knew that that was a thing that you could do, and that path was an available path. And I think that made me want to be a writer. So I used to write. I wrote a lot of like Pippi Longstocking fan fiction, and also Joan Aiken fan fiction. She's like a gothic, and if you really think about my work, it's basically like Pippi Longstocking and Joan Aiken smushed together, right? Like gothic, and then both of them involve houses, like big mysterious houses, and then young people on their own in one way or another. Anyway, I wrote a ton of fan fiction as a kid. And really wanted to be a novelist, and then I lost track of it and wanted to be an actor in my teens and college years. So I only took one creative writing class. I was the worst writer in my creative writing class. The reason I know this is because my teacher told me. He didn't say it exactly like that, but he said, I didn't read your work when you revised it because I knew that you were a B student already. So that was a real, I didn't study creative writing after that. I became a self-taught creative writer. And I did it mostly by reading some craft books, but also by taking works of fiction that I found very powerful and unpacking them structurally. So I know I took apart Geek Love by Catherine Dunn and David Copperfield. I don't know that I got to the end of David Copperfield because it's very long structurally. But I looked at, like what is Dunn or Dickens doing in the start of this book, right? How are they handling the exposition? There's this scene and then there's this scene, and how are they drawing me in, and how are they creating mysteries or curiosities for me? And I took notes, like, oh, they're literally doing this thing, and then breaking into maybe they're having a family scene and then breaking into a generalization, and then and then they're like maybe explicitly articulating a conflict, right? This person never got along, or I always wanted this person to be like this, right? And sometimes it's very bald, and you don't even notice how naked the statement of conflict or the creation of curiosity is. I know I took apart a couple John Irving novels, and Irving will literally say, like, it seemed like everything was fine then, but it would all go to hell later. Or, little did I know that, my world was going to come crashing down. He's like that naked and basic in getting his plot moving. And that I learned. I'll have other questions. Thank you.
I guess I have two. So one, I want to talk to you about the vocabulary choice, I guess, in the book. I'm an educator, so I'm thinking like high school book club, like what are some things I would talk about here? And the vocabulary choice in the book, like calling the main character using mummy to address her mother, and gat, the way he spoke and the vocabulary that he used was just, at least for this area, very unusual. And I know it'd be something that I would talk about with my high schoolers, like, what do you think of these, or why do you think they spoke the way they spoke, or they use that? Can you talk about like your choices, I guess, for the words that those characters use?
Well, one of the things that I'm often trying to do in writing fiction is to create an idiolect, by which I mean, a kind of a vocabulary, a set of slang words, a verbal universe for the characters, and I think this is something that teenagers do that is so fascinating to me. And I think it is impossible for someone of my age to accurately represent current teenage slang. right? Especially, beyond the region in which I live right now, right? I could, if I were trying to replicate the slang of Louisville teenagers, I would do a terrible job. But also, by the time the book came out, the slang would be different, right? And the musical references, all that. So instead of trying to be current or even regionally accurate, I am instead creating a linguistic universe specific to my imaginary island or my boarding school in Disreputable History of Frankie Landa Banks, or the Seattle friend group that's in the Boyfriendless books, or almost every book I'm doing that. And that happens very often in the rewrite process, where I'm thinking through the slang and the in-jokes and the rhythms of speech that is specific to this imaginary group of teenagers, and trying to make it specific to that book and that world. So it has outside influences, of course, but thank you for noticing that. That's why they talk the way they do.
Awesome. And Brooke, I want to say your book was fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
I had not heard of it until I saw this
It's super
event.
good. I love it.
Yeah, advertised. I immediately grabbed it and thought, oh, I need to be educated, so I'm going to read this. But it was awesome.
Oh,
your plot twists were fantastic, and you answered, I guess, a little bit of my question. I was going to ask you with the plot twist, but can you talk more about your writing process, like how you really just developed that plot? Did you know where you were headed? Or I have to say my jaw hit the floor a couple times. I was like, I did not see that coming. It was great.
Oh, thank you so much. I love that. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it took me about 10 years to write the book. So I started it when I was 16 years old.
Oh my gosh.
Didn't get published until I was 27. So it was a process. And a lot of it, the hardest part for me was the plot. I mean, I had the characters figured out mostly by the time I was I don't know, a couple drafts in. So by the time I was 18, and the rest of that time was just figuring out what the heck happens. I knew that Ellis was this super evil dude. Didn't really know what he did. So that was really a process that came about in this really I don't know, and not even a way that I could probably replicate again. It was draft after draft after draft. And even when I turned it into, even after I had an agent, and I turned that book into her, like I mentioned earlier, it had a plot twist in it, and she didn't even really say, you need to do this, you need to do that. It was more just I feel like there's more here. So then I had to go back and it's kind of like what you were describing earlier, where I knew there was more there. And it was it was already there. I just needed to uncover it. So each of the billion drafts that I did was just peeling back a layer at a time. But I mean, after all that time, it's really gratifying to hear someone enjoyed it. So thank you. Hopefully the next one doesn't take that long.
No, it won't. It won't. The first one takes the longest for sure.
I also have two questions. So in We Were Liars, I really thought it was interesting how you describe the characters, not with an image like food or
Sugar,
certain,
curiosity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to know what made you describe them like that.
That was something that came up in during the rewrite process, for sure. I mean, I do many, many, many drafts. And with every book, I'm searching for a way to defamiliarize the language a little bit. I don't want to write something that's inaccessible. I don't want to write something that's, not fun to read. I'm looking to write something that invites you into the world and makes you want to turn pages. But by defamiliarizing the language, I mean, just using it in ways that are a little bit surprising. And so to describe people with nouns instead of adjectives, I mean, I can't really say how I came up with it, but it felt specific to Cadence's voice. And I worked those descriptions over and over until I got ones that I felt reflected the characters the way I wanted it to. Here's a small tidbit. Gat is described as, in part, as ambition and strong coffee. And in the dedication to Family of Liars, I said with ambition and black coffee, because it was only in a late rewrite that I said strong coffee, and I had forgotten my own sentence. So my German publisher wrote me a note and said, "Why did you change this? Can you explain it?" And I was like, "I forgot. I don't know." So,
And I also want to know like why Cadence would write like quotes on her hands and look at them, I guess. So, what was
well, I was a person who drew on myself a lot, and unsurprisingly, actually, I have a teenage kiddo who draws on themselves a lot, and their friends, like, they come home covered in we actually went out and bought like tattoo markers that are less toxic than Sharpie, because the Sharpie was like all over the legs and the arms, and it was a little much. So I think that, but I do think that like that impulse to mark your body with things that you find resonant, like that. I am a person with tattoos. I have been interested in the history of tattooing and the psychology of tattooing for a long time, and so I was interested in having Cadence, as she's figuring out, right, who am I? What do I believe? Do I believe the mottos of my family? Do I believe mottos that come from my friends? What, do I believe that you should, I'm blanking now on the quote, that do not accept an evil you can change, right? Do I believe that quote? Should I believe that quote? It sounds good, right? But what does that actually lead to in the case of Cadence and her friends? I think, it was a way of externalizing that journey, right? Of questioning who am I, and what does it mean? And what does it mean when I put it on my body, right? When I incorporate it into my identity.
I'm a Jersey girl who landed in Louisville, but I also have children in Brooklyn and New Jersey.
Awesome.
And they're in the neighborhood of Emma Straub's bookstore, and I've also been to Ann Patchett's bookstore. So I'm wondering which of all the authors, who are your favorite authors? Who do you look forward to read?
Oh, well, those are both wonderful bookstores, are they not?
They are.
Books are magic. And wait, what the Patchett bookstore is called?
Parnassus.
Parnassus. They're both amazing neighborhood bookstores run by authors. It's very cool. Patricia Highsmith is a big role model for me, particularly in my novel, Genuine Fraud. If you don't know Highsmith, she was a very influential crime writer in the 40s and 50s. She wrote The Talented Mr. Ripley and Strangers on a Train. And she is very unflinchingly willing to look at the ugly side of human beings and what they're capable of, but nonetheless in a very propulsive plot. And I find her fascinating. But I have a PhD in Victorian literature. So that's like, I'm always going back, even when I think I'm not writing in response to Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, David Copperfield, Great Expectations. I am often in one way or another. In We Were Liars, you can see Wuthering Heights all the way through it. And
part of your history, so you just comes up whether you're even trying it or not.
Yes, precisely. So a lot of the times it's unconscious, and I only notice it, in rereading after I've gone through several drafts. I say, oh, I'm seeing the echoes of things that I read in grad school. Okay, one more. Yeah, bring it on.
So taller than everybody else here. So I actually was just curious, where do you write at? Do you have like a desk you sit at? Do you free write? Do you take a laptop around? Do you get a nice view? What's your typical place you write at?
I have the luxury of having a home office, and I sit there a lot on my laptop, on my couch. But I'm a parent, and and that's been the case for a long time. And basically, as soon as I became a parent, I became a person who wrote in 45-minute chunks of nap time, or you know, when we were moving house, I wrote like sitting on the floor of the new house while waiting for the contractor to come who was late. I write on the airplane. I write in the hotel room. You know, I gave up ritual and
Sounds like you did what you had to do.
yeah. And I think that has been, you know, for the most part, good. Like it's almost like putting on noise canceling headphones or something, right? It's just like if you can just you know, turn off the internet. That is important. You know, turn off the internet and then like just this is all you are doing and the rest of the world goes away. It doesn't, you know, and you know, you can get something really good written in 20 minutes if your project is already moving. You know what I mean? It's getting it up and running takes maybe a little more concentrated time, a little more focus, a little more quiet time in the office. But once it's up and running, if I've got 20 minutes, some days that's all I have. And I write.
Just got it right.
Yeah.
And then the other question I had was, do you ever like have work that you work and just kind of sit on for a while, and then you know, is it nearly a whole book that you come back to years later when you're just feeling that mood again? How does that work for you?
Oh yeah, very much so. Thank you for asking that. I have a lot of things that are in process, and I have a novel that I stopped writing, I would say maybe about halfway through, in order to write Family of Liars. And that was a book that I was writing without a contract. It was during the pandemic. I just really needed to write, and my publisher wasn't buying anything because they were freaking out, you know? And so I just thought, there's no way I'm going to sell anything. I should just write something that I feel like writing. And I did that, and then I went on the walk with Gail Foreman, and she yelled at me, and then I did Family of Liars in between. So that book I need to pick up again, and I feel a little like my muscles are stiff or something. Like I haven't gotten back in the flow of that. I have no doubt that I will finish it later, but it might not be the next thing I do. It will. It just has to be on that back burner. Yeah. So I start things and don't finish them and then come back to them for sure. Yeah.
Hi. I really like what you were saying earlier about the feminism of writing morally gray female characters, and I was just wondering if any of that mindset kind of affected your writing of other female characters in Liars.
I mean, I think it is maybe more just organic. Like I'm trying to make my characters, to the best of my ability, nuanced and complicated, right? So, you know, Mirren functions a lot as a comic relief character, right? She's funny, and she has, you know, Drake Loggerhead, her boyfriend, and, you know, she's very interested in his muscles and his gifts of yellow roses and all of that. And so it's very fun to write those parts of her. But as I, you know, rewrote and thought about it, I, you know, thought about what struggles she might be undergoing, and from her perspective, what is hard in this summer. And so she deepened, right? And that becomes, I think, a character who can be unpacked in feminist terms, for sure, right? You know, but I think that's certainly true. That I was thinking in terms of the aunties, right? About what it means to be the daughter of Harris and Tipper Sinclair, and the limits to their life trajectories that have been put on them basically by the patriarchs. Now there's so many questions. I love you people.
In the We Were Liars, which character was your favorite to develop?
Oh, I had the most fun with Johnny. And you know, I used to be a comedy writer. Nobody wants me to write comedies anymore. But all my early YA novels are comedies. The Boyfriend List and Fly on the Wall and Disreputable History, and even Again, I think, which is a more recent one, I think it will make you cry, but it also has a lot of room for there to be funny things and lots of very comic sequences. And so I always have a lot of fondness for any comic relief characters, even in these sadder, more complicated, darker novels. And I think that that I respond most to dramatic stories when there is a certain amount of humor in there, because the humor attaches me to the world and to the characters, right? So I get attached to Johnny, and then I care what the situation is. And the reason I'm attached to him is because he's funny at first, right? That's the entry point into caring. So, yeah. And Johnny shows up in Family, just a little bit. But, okay. Yes, we can do pictures.
So I guess one last question. You talked earlier about liars going big on TikTok, creators talking about creators as in artists, authors, talking about how it's hard to sell their work without having that viral activity. So, as authors, what is your take on it and how it influences your ability to do the work you want to do? And then how can we support you? Because one of us is sort of outside of that and working with our authors to help you guys.
Oh, I love that. I mean, this is what is so nice about social media and book people is, right, you all are advocates for books and you know it and you want to advocate for the books that you care about and you can. It's so nice. I don't know what to say about social media. I mean, I do. I just think of it as a small chunk, like a small little part of my job. And I do not go down rabbit holes of looking at stuff about me on the internet because that is really paralyzing in terms of creativity, right? Because if everybody likes you, you're a liar. So, but you don't need to go and listen to all the people who don't like you for hours on end, right? Because then you feel bad and you can't make a book. So, if people are genuinely criticizing something that is a moral problem with a piece of work, then, if you're being called out on something that is problematic in your work or something like that, then perhaps you need to go down that rabbit hole. I have done that to learn and grow as a person and become a better creator and more responsible and better human being. But for the most part, if people are talking trash about you on the internet, you can ignore it and not even look at it. So I just try to make something a little bit entertaining, right? Whether it's on Instagram or Twitter or TikTok, I'm just trying to offer a little bit of content that I think would be interesting to somebody who likes my books. So usually it has some words in it, not 100% of the time. But I'm just trying to think of it as I'm offering a little bit of the kind of content I create in a different form. And I really try not to think about whether that content is successful or not successful. So I keep it separate from my identity as a creator of fiction, if that makes sense. It's this is this little side thing that I do that's kind of fun, and if it stops being fun, I'm not going to do it because it can be toxic and you don't want to have that. What do you think?
I'm very much still figuring out that balance. I really struggle with the social media stuff, and you think certain things are going to hit and take off and then they don't, or certain things that you weren't expecting take off, so you just never know. And it does seem like there is some pressure to, we'll promote the things that, are already viral kind of thing. But you have no control over that, obviously. I mean, you write the best book you can, because if you hadn't written a great book in the first place, it wouldn't have taken off, My husband and I joke all the time that, Taylor Swift just needs to walk into an airport and find my book and post about it on Instagram, and all my problems will be solved. But if you don't write the good book in the first place for Taylor Swift to find, she'll never find it. So, I've been trying to just focus on the things that I can control, which is writing a good book. Because like you said, when I, focus on the social media too much, it can be a dark hole pretty quickly. But as far as what
can readers do?
I think just the most effective thing is if you like a book, tell your friends. And I know that seems like a small thing, but it's such a massive ripple effect if they tell their friends, and, word of mouth is really important.
Yeah. And word of mouth, on social media, it's the same thing. You can make a TikTok video, you can tell your friend in the neighborhood, you can post it on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, Reddit or Wattpad or whatever. So I think, yes, getting the word out is a lovely thing, and authors really do appreciate the people who are having book conversations and sharing the books that they love with other members of their community. Even if we don't see it, we know it's happening, and we basically, that is the real way that books are sold, right? I mean, they're sold by being in the bookstore or the website that you can purchase them at, but that is not the reason most of you buy any of the books you buy. And you read reviews a little bit, but mostly it is conversations and recommendations from people that you trust. And so, yeah, it's really valuable, the book sharing that people do. And We Were Liars is a perfect example. Like, I had nothing to do with it. My publisher had nothing to do with it. Nobody in any kind of official position made We Were Liars a bestseller. It was 100% organic book talking. We're going to sign books. We have their tables out there, and the bookseller, Carmichael's, is here. I want to say, just for a second, that if you haven't been to Carmichael's, you should go and you should buy the next holiday is Father's Day. You should buy your and then 4th of July, maybe you need some patriotic reads or anti-patriotic reads or whatever floats your boat, or historical reads or something. But your local independent bookseller, is like a really key player in the culture and community of your town. And so you need to buy your things there, and you need to tell your neighbors to buy their things there. And you need to keep doing it, not just this week, but week after week. So because we're here because Carmichael's brought us here. And it's all, right? You want book people in your community. You want them to stay open. You want them to keep bringing you authors. You have to shop there. So, if you haven't actually seen the store, go see it this week. And thank you all for coming. And we're going to sign books. And